So President Yoon is no longer the acting president, but is still the elected president of South Korea. His powers have been suspended. And you could argue his problem started very early on because he won his election by a very narrow margin. 48.56% is what he got in the vote to make him president of Korea, to 47.83% to the current leader of the opposition of Korea, who's now putting him under some pressure. So he had quite a narrow margin. His party doesn't have a majority hold of the South Korean parliament anymore, which puts him under more pressure. And he's also faced a number of scandals, both him and his wife, including accusations of corruption, which has undermined him and his sort of hold on power. And also he's had very low approval ratings sort of towards the end of his tenure, which has put him under a lot of pressure. There was sort of fear that he might face a criminal investigation, even him or his wife. So his response to that was to declare martial law in South Korea, which ultimately failed. He declared martial law, put the military in control of the government, and made moves to sort of take control of the parliament building. But ultimately that failed, as the South Korean parliamentarians were able to get into the South Korean parliament despite a military build-up, and they then voted almost immediately after he declared martial law. There was some question as to whether Yoon could hold on, but it seems like he either didn't want to order his military in, or they were unwilling to follow up on that order. And so they failed to stop the vote, and in the wake of the vote he felt under such pressure that he had to rescind martial law, and effectively that ended, some would argue, the martial law crisis. But there's now a real South Korean constitutional crisis ongoing. There were efforts to impeach Yoon afterwards and sort of hold him account for his declaring martial law. The first vote failed, but then in the second vote, because you need sort of a clear majority to impeach a South Korean president, the second vote succeeded, and that depended on his own party either having to abstain, spoil their ballots, or some of them having to support the vote to impeach him, which did happen in the end. And so in the end, the parliament voted to impeach him. That's not the end of the matter, though, because it's not enough to have a simple vote to impeach President Yoon. You also have to have the South Korean Supreme Court weigh on this and sort of decide whether they had valid cause to do so, and that vote has to be unanimous. The issue with this, of course, is that there's only currently 6, or there was until very recently, and so you need additional judges in. Now, once Yoon was impeached per the vote, and pending this Supreme Court decision, he was removed of his acting president status, and the Prime Minister, his Prime Minister was appointed as the acting president. That was Han Duck-soo, who became the acting president on the 14th of December. Now, since Han Duck-soo became the acting president, he's been under a lot of pressure. Obviously, there's a lot of demand to investigate Yoon and to hold him to account, and he has been accused by the opposition of sort of holding that up. And he blocked appointment Supreme Court justices. At least he didn't enable them to be immediately appointed. And I believe he made some arguments that he was doing it to sort of ensure fair process, and he was sort of weighing it up carefully, was his argument. But some argued or felt that he was effectively holding up the process and helping out his former president. So in the wake of all this pressure, there was a vote, and the acting president Han Duck-soo was then removed by Parliament as they felt he wasn't fulfilling his duties, and he was then replaced by the deputy PM. So now the president's been replaced, and his replacement has now been replaced, which I believe is the first time an acting president in South Korea's history as a parliamentary democracy. I believe that's the first time this has ever happened that an acting president's been impeached. So he's been removed, and he's replaced by the deputy PM, Choi Sang-mok, who has now, he's the acting president, and he has moved forward and allowed some Supreme Court justices to be appointed, which I believe moves this process forward a bit. And so now the clock is ticking on that court case, because I believe there's 180 days to hear this case. There's going to be arguments. Yoon's going to defend himself, and they'll then weigh in on it. And goodness knows what happens then. Would he be restored to office? This could lead to complete chaos. And as if that weren't enough, there's been further chaos because South Korea's police have been moving to arrest Yoon and charge him with a warrant on suspicion that he may have broken South Korean law. They've moved in to execute that warrant, and there was then a standoff, as I believe about 200 of Yoon's own security, the South Korean president's, because he's still, to some extent, in office, even though he's not the acting president, refused to allow him to be arrested. They're still standing by him as the former president and the elected president, and they barricaded him within his residency. There was a big display as they refused to allow him to be arrested. There was a standoff between his guards, who outnumbered the police who were acting to arrest him. There were also supporters of Yoon there, some of whom were moved away and arrested. There was a chaotic scene of protest and fracas, and in the end, the South Korean police have stood down, I think, under fears that this could escalate. They don't want, effectively, a standoff with their own military, and so it looks like that warrant that they filed for him will now expire, and they're not looking to arrest him, at least not immediately. And so, again, this absolute chaos, and just throws into question what's happening in South Korea. But for the moment, hopefully that standoff's been resolved, and I imagine they'll probably just wait for this court case to potentially remove him from office as president before looking to consider arresting him or pursuing charges against him again. And so we'll just have to see if anything else props up before that court case and see what happens with the court case.